Welcome, dear friends, once again from the Guttenberg Saints of St. Paul Lutheran and St. John's Lutheran right here in Guttenberg, Iowa. The meditation for this week is based upon Isaiah 55, verses 1 through 5. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you that have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor that does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear, and come to me. Listen, so that you may live. I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. See, I made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and a commander for the peoples. See, you shall call nations that you do not know, and nations that you do not know shall run to you, because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. Here ends the reading a lesson. Praise to you, O Christ. Dear friends, the old phrase goes, promises, promises. We learn from early on, from when we are young, that we are to keep our promises. Sadly enough, we also learn early on how to break those promises, sometimes by rather devious means. And as of late, the question almost comes to mind, are promises kept at all? Or are they mere words to be spoken to someone, to make someone else, or even to make ourselves temporarily happy? What I find strange is that in the year of elections, I actually hear very few promises being made by anybody. Instead, we hear more smear campaigns, which could take down the other person. I could say something concerning about a couple of the commandments, like how to speak well of our neighbor and not lying. But I will not go further. Even Jesus speaks about promises when he mentions oaths. He reminds people to be careful when speaking promises, as people should keep the promises that they make, especially the ones that are made before God. Jesus then went on to state that we should make everything plain, more simple, so that our yes means yes, as well as when we say no, we mean no. In this week's reading that comes from the Old Testament, the prophet Isaiah speaks words of hope to a people that feel lost and forgotten. Their homeland has been ravaged. Their people have been scattered to the four ends of the earth, some landing in Egypt, others in Mesopotamia, and still others around Rome. In their grief, they work. Yeah, sounds familiar. They work and they work. Mainly for food, but mainly they work for their captors. Some have plainly given up. A lot of others are almost there. But the prophet brings a word from God that recalls the covenant that God made through David. And over the years, the people of Israel have remembered the words that God had spoken and the promises that God had made to people such as Abraham and Noah and Moses. But the major promise to which the people cling to, comes from 2 Samuel, where Nathan comes before the King David, with a word from God that God would establish his house forever. From this promise, we have the seeds of the promised Messiah. That when people look back, they would remember the promise that God made to one day bring back the kingdom. And when read alongside other covenants, other promises, such as the ones made to Moses, Noah, and Abraham, people knew that they could trust God. And that when God makes a promise, that promise will indeed come true. Maybe not in our concept of time, and maybe not in the way that we want or expect, but still God fulfills the promises. Later this week, I will meet with my older confirmation group. We'll take a good look at the sacraments. For as a Christian, and even more so as Lutherans, we look to those sacraments, Holy Baptism and Holy Communion, as signs of God's work here among us. But this work comes through the foundation of promises that God makes. In baptism, God claims us as a child, that God clings to us so tightly that nothing will be able to separate us. No matter how hard we wriggle and try, we will not be able to get away. Just try to hug a teenager once, and you will know what I mean. The arms of God are strong and binding. We all try to get away. We all sin. But God's reach goes on forever. Then in Holy Communion, Jesus speaks the words of the new covenant, the one where we are fed at the table, restored and forgiven, where we feel the very presence of God as we partake of the bread and the wine. And Jesus says, "This is my body given for you. This is my blood shed for you." And through the bread and through the wine, we are promised not only everlasting life, but also abundant life here and now. Or, as Luther put it, we are freed from sin, death, and the devil. Those are basically two sides of the same coin. And so we read this week about God's promises as they are found in the prophet Isaiah. And when we read them, we are reminded that God continues to work through the most troublesome times in the history of the world and God's people. And at a time like this, we need to hear those words of hope once again. These words, these promises, ring so true in the world that we live, that we can cling to the promises, and only to the promises that God makes. Thank you. Amen.